Jermaine Burton, Jalen Polk, and Xavier Legette are all projected to be round 2 picks, but you should only be targeting one of them in your dynasty leagues. We will explain on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. How'd you like that new intro, by the way? Shout out to the Locked On Podcast Network for giving us a new intro. And shout out to FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. On today's show, we're taking a look at 3 receivers who are projected to go in round 2, maybe shortly after round 2. And we're going to talk about their dynasty values and which one that you should be targeting in your dynasty leagues. And let's start with Jermaine Burton, Kate, from Alabama, a player whose tape is really good, but some of the off-the-field issues could cause him to fall in this draft.
Yeah, let's break Jermaine Burton down, who 6 foot, 196 pounds, played 2 seasons with Georgia, 2 seasons with Alabama, where he's coming out of. Has a lot of versatility as a route runner. And of the wide receivers that we're going to be talking about today, I do think boasts some of the cleanest tape you're going to see. We're going to get to the off the field issues, but let's talk about just first the prospect. Like I said, really clean tape overall. There's not a ton of fault that you can find in Jermaine Burton's games again. Like can vary his speed. A decent route runner, has decent size, not like the biggest, but he's not one of these teeny tiny wide receivers with speed. He's
Nope.
I think got some more versatility to his game. Never had a true breakout season, never broke the 800 receiving yard plane. Did have back-to-back seasons with 7+ touchdowns here at Alabama. But I mean, again, a lot to like about Jermaine Burton and the tape overall. He's got a lot of, I think, valuable traits that are going to translate very well to a professional wide receiver at the next level. But Marcus, can you give us a little bit of context into some of the off the field concerns? Because I do think, honestly, that's probably the biggest talking point when I'm watching Jermaine Burton, not watching Jermaine Burton, but when we're talking about him as a prospect. I do think that these red flags are much bigger probably than anything we're going to see on tape or on the statistical profile.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2022, there was an incident during the Tennessee game where Alabama lost on the last second field goal, where the Tennessee fans stormed the field. Jermaine Burton did not like that and hit a woman fan coming off the stadium. Obviously, that's not a good look, but that's not the only issue. Some scouts have talked about some maturity issues inside the locker room, not being super professional. One note that we have from Dane Brugler is that he's been to 6 different schools over the last 6 years, consistently in and out of programs. A lot of people at both Georgia and Alabama, while those are 2 very productive and winning schools, they were both happy. They were happy to see Jermaine Burton leave. So despite being a very talented player, there's some real off the field issues that could cause him to slip. I did want to mention the production. Now, he didn't have a true breakout season, never went over 800 yards in a season, but having 4 seasons over 400 yards at Georgia and Alabama is pretty impressive. Like, he was on the field as a true freshman for Georgia, putting up putting up solid numbers. So I do think he projects as somebody that could be a impact player right away. He's just not somebody that I'm all that interested targeting in my dynasty leagues, because there's going to be a lot of variability here with, does the team trust him? Can he have a role? What does it look like? I'm kind of out on Jermaine Burton, the dynasty asset.
And what's really interesting, despite the fact that you do have, not necessarily like the most robust production profile analytically. I mean, over his past 4 seasons, 95th percentile in terms of PFF receiving grade, 85th percentile in terms of separation percentage, right around average in terms of yards per route run. Where he really wins, though, I think, is down the field. And you see that with his average depth of target, ranked 17th among 385 qualifying wide receivers over the last 4 seasons in terms of average depth of target. Now, he's not a big yards after the catch guy. You're not necessarily going to, I think, rely on him in that way. You're not going to generate touches. But in terms of upside as a down the field threat, like, I think you're going to like a lot of what Jermaine Burton has to offer on tape.
He's a fine player, but he also doesn't, to me, like the risks do not outweigh the rewards. Like even if he pans out and the maturity stuff gets better as he gets older and there's no more incidents, is this somebody who projects as like a number one receiver on his team in the NFL? Probably not. I think he can be a really, really nice complementary receiver. And I'm just not willing to spend up on that, especially when you consider his lack of production, his off the field incidents, the maturity. I would rather just let somebody else draft him.
I think that's very fair because I think like you can look at the player, and if you're not aware of the off the field stuff, like you're going to like Jermaine Burton. And that
Yeah.
I think is probably the best trap that you could lay for some of your fellow dynasty managers. Now, we said at the top of the show that we were going to talk about three wide receivers here to round out our wide receiver series. We said you're going to want to roster one of them. That means there's two left that we could possibly be talking about. That's Jalen Polk and Xavier Legette. So I think next, let's talk about Jalen Polk, and let's find out if he is the rookie wide receiver in this group to roster on your dynasty leagues.
This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know that it's Locked On's NFL Mock Draft Live show is coming up on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern, streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. Yes, you're going to see me breaking down some picks. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern, streaming live on Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel, or on YouTube, or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, Kay, let's talk about Jalen Polk, who was at times the number 3 receiver at Washington. This team was absolutely loaded. He had a huge season, 69 catches for over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns. What did you think of his tape?
Interestingly, Jalen Polk is probably one of the most exciting players, I think, in terms of maybe my type of wide receiver. Jalen Polk can make some absolutely jaw-dropping plays. And I think what is so impressive about Polk, you mentioned the really productive season that he had in 2023. Obviously, this was a very good Washington offense. And to have that kind of production playing alongside Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, who all wide receivers that are probably going to go in, the top, Jalen McMillan, top 100, do we think?
Oh, easily.
Like,
Yeah,
I
easily.
think like
Yep.
pretty darn impressive considering the talent that they have at wide receiver to be able to carve out that role against two other top competitors. Now, I think what Jalen Polk wins with is like body control, solid hands. I mean, play strength. I love the contested catch ability. I mean, Marcus, one of the things that just pops off on Jalen Polk's tape is some of the like crazy catches that he can make, not necessarily in terms of like circus catches, but in terms of the concentration that he has as a wide receiver. I feel like is so far beyond
Mhm.
what you're going to see from a lot of wide receivers in this class. He can pluck the ball out of the air. He can make a contested catch. He can make a catch in the face of a tackler coming from the other direction. Like there is no fear in Jalen Polk's game, and for that reason, he is one of the most fun wide receivers to watch in this group.
I really like him. But here's the thing I keep coming back with Polk. Is there one part of his game that like really stands out for you, like that you think makes him exceptional? Because I do think he's really good at contested catches. But I mean, he's 6'1", he's 203, he
Mhm.
ran a 4.52. All those are fine. Like a 4.52 is absolutely fine. I'm not knocking him.
Yeah.
It's just I see a very good player that's that typical jack of all, master of none type of
Mhm.
player, like jack of all trades. And I think that's Polk. I think he's going to project as a really good number 3 option for a team early in his NFL career. I think he can become a good number 2 receiver by year 3, year 4. But I do wonder, like, because he's not a great route runner, because he's not a great athlete, he's not amazing after the catch. Is he just destined to be a solid role player in the NFL?
I think that's a great word for Jalen Polk is I think he's going to be an excellent role player. And I think what he's going to, endear himself to teams with is just the general toughness. Like there's nothing that he's asked to do that he doesn't do. I think willingly. He's a fine blocker. He's a willing blocker. Again, I mentioned that toughness in terms of like the contested catch situations. Again, it's not necessarily just that he like physically overpowers players. It's the concentration he has when he makes those catches. And that I do think is like the calling card when I put on the tape for Jalen Polk, but everything else is pretty good. And
It's
I think
good. Yes.
that's why, you look at the tape and he might be maybe a little bit more of an underwhelming prospect because there's not necessarily one thing that pops off for him outside of, like I said, that concentration. But I think that kind of concentration, that toughness is going to endear him to NFL teams. But the question is like, what does that trait necessarily do in terms of carving yourself a role that's
Yeah.
going to yield enough volume for fantasy
Yes.
relevance?
I have a comp for him, and I think he's going to be better than this player, just to be clear. But here, his game reminds me a lot of Romeo Dubs, the Packers wide receiver, who is an outside receiver that wins on a lot of contested catch stuff. A very good player, and Dubs has been pretty productive over the last couple of years for Green Bay. But it doesn't really project as somebody who has sustainable fantasy value. And again, that's my concern with Polk. Maybe he lands into a really good situation where he can get a bunch of targets early on in his career. But I think his best fit would to be a number 3 receiver and just be really efficient and reliable. Again, good NFL player, somebody who deserves to be a top 75 pick, but not somebody who I'm all that interested in going out and acquiring in my dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I do think that this is going to be one of the more interesting players to watch because I do like him. I like his tape. Everything, generally speaking, probably a little bit better than I like him for fantasy value. Analytically, not anything to turn your nose at necessarily.
No.
We mentioned that 82nd percentile contested catch percentage over that last 2 seasons, 76th percentile in terms of receiving grade, 79th percentile in terms of separation percentage, which I still think is pretty impressive generally speaking because he's not the most refined route runner. He's a solid enough athlete. Like you mentioned, 4.52 40-yard dash. That's not bad. 75th percentile in terms of or better in terms of his jumps. Like, he's just a very well-rounded prospect that I can see teams falling in love with. But again, like, does that translate to a high enough target volume? I'm not convinced yet.
No, and I think there's some other comps if you want to go like on more of the lower end, like a Jalen Tolbert who came out of South Alabama, had very similar numbers, very similar athletic build. It's just these type of receivers just need a ton of volume to be effective and useful in our fantasy leagues, and I'm just not sure that he's going to get that. I really like Jalen Polk. I think he's a very good player, but not somebody that I'm particularly interested in trying to acquire unless he gets into an amazing situation. So draft spot will be important here. I will say I like Polk significantly more than Germaine Burton. So if we're just comparing those two, I prefer Polk. But again, somebody that I'm not really targeting in my dynasty leagues in this stages of my rookie draft, Kate, this is where I'm going to be going after running backs. I would just much rather take a shot on a early day 3 running back than somebody like Jalen Polk.
Can you give me 2 landing spots for Jalen Polk that if he went to this, this location, wherever that may be, are there 2 landing spots that you could name that you would say, all right, I could buy into Jalen Polk. Let's say he gets the day 2 draft capital, round 2 draft capital. What landing spots would have you intrigued from a dynasty value perspective?
Yeah, 2. The first one, the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, this is actually one I think makes a lot of sense because Polk will block his butt off, and that's going to be an important thing for Chargers receivers now with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman.
Jim Harbaugh is familiar with this wide receiver after all. Played him in the national championship game.
I think Polk would instantly be the best receiver on that team, and I think he would win over Justin Herbert pretty quickly. So that is a situation where he could step right in and get a bunch of targets and be productive. So I really like that. And then one that's kind of intriguing to me are the Miami Dolphins. Now, the reason why the Dolphins are intriguing is you have the guys that have the speed with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Tyreek Hill is 30. Jalen Waddle has been pretty injury prone in his college and NFL career. But what they haven't had is the guy that can go up and win the contested catch stuff. So he could provide something different for this offense. They want to play 3 receivers a bunch anyway, so he would be on the field a ton. I think that's a situation where he's buried a little bit on the depth chart, but also could get a lot of high value targets. So two day 2 spots that I think would make a lot of sense for Polk.
Love that.
All right. So we talked about Jermaine Burton. We talked about Jalen Polk, who we like a little bit more. But let's talk about the receiver that we are really interested in our dynasty leagues. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've been told that I'm a competitive person. I get really into board games and video games and sports. We all have a competitive side. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. And I'm sure you heard of it, but it's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist of Monopoly where you play on not only one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like in the classic Monopoly game. But now I can also rob their vaults of riches for myself, and the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or the Google Play Store. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. I absolutely love FanDuel, and it's playoff time now in the NBA. We've got the play-in games on Tuesday. I believe the second round of the playoff games are on Friday. We've got the NHL playoffs. We've got baseball. We've got NFL draft prop bets. And FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, we're going to start our running back profiles on Tuesday. And of course, we're going to start with Jonathan Brooks from Texas. So make sure you check that out. We'll discuss his dynasty value, some potential landing spots, his profile. Again, that'll be on Tuesday. But we're finishing up here with Xavier Legette, one of the more intriguing receivers in this class. Only 1 year of production. But Katie kind of has every other thing that you want when it comes to a future #1 receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, I think Legette probably one of the more interesting prospects. Now the basics, 6'1", 221 pounds, big boy, has that physical build that you want. And that is exactly how he won at South Carolina. He played 5 seasons there. Big physical, yards after the catch machine, I think profile is one of the only guy in this segment that we're doing today that I think truly does have that sort of alpha wide receiver 1 potential. Now, you mentioned the production, right? Late breakout age, 2023 season at 71 catches, 1,255 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns. And, people are going to have some questions about that late breakout. And especially after our episode on Ricky Pearsall, where we talked a little bit about that lack of production through most of his career. And, we got a little, a couple people riled in the YouTube comments here about Ricky Pearsall, but I'm actually going to give this a credit to Xavier Legette for the late breakout. I want to give some context to that late breakout because he played quarterback in high school. So this is a guy coming into South Carolina, 2019 as a true freshman. Then you had the COVID season, only played 6 games in that season. So really definitely had, a derailed early portion of his career, but saw that growth.
I'll even add some more context into that. He was very close with his family, and both his mom and his dad passed away when he was in high school. I believe his dad passed away just before he graduated high school. So there was a lot going on for Xavier Legette early on in his life.
Yeah, and you know what? I think the fact that we saw him persevere into all of this, and again, after that COVID season, saw that year-over-year growth. So I'm going to write off the first 2 seasons, right? Let's pretend that we're looking at his profile, 2021 season through 2023, saw that year-over-year growth that resulted in that final season breakout. Generally speaking, what you're going to love about Legette is his size, his play strength. Has a lot of, I think, burst that you're going to like for a guy that's especially that size.
Yeah.
40-inch vert, 126-inch broad jump, 91st percentile and 79th percentile, respectively. And again, some of the ways that he wins, I think people are going to be enamored with. But what you really got to be enamored with, especially, is the fight, the resiliency, and the fact that this is a guy that faced a lot of adversity in his life. This is a guy that, again, made that transition to a new position and, didn't necessarily get off to the fastest start amidst all those circumstances, but has a lot of the physical traits that you're going to look for. I think he's probably the biggest project in terms of skill set and refinement of this group, but has all of those physical traits. And he has the mental fortitude, I think, to make those improvements, which you're going to love.
So again, I'm not a huge fan of the late breakout receivers, just because the history has shown us that it's not great. I mean, in the first 4 years of his college career, he never had more than 175 yards in a season, right? 5 touchdowns in the first 4 years. and then he has this huge season. So I'm a little skeptical of 23-year-olds dominating 17 and 18-year-olds. However, one of the reasons why I am intrigued with him is the list of receivers that are over 220 pounds that run in the 4.3s and that play in the SEC is very, very low, right? And I think he is really dynamic after the catch, and he can make plays down the field. If I'm going to gamble on one of these three receivers, I'm going to take the player here that has the SEC production, that has the elite athleticism, and is pretty rare after the catch. So I'm not the biggest Xavier Legette fan. I know some people have him inside their top 6 or 7 receivers. I'm a little bit lower than that. But of these three, I would absolutely take a shot on Legette over the other ones.
Yeah, this is a guy that I think, generally speaking, I'm going to bank on the traits hitting. I'm going to bank on the prospect himself in terms of, what we've seen from him amidst all these very challenging circumstances. He's clearly got the work ethic component. And again, just the overall physicality. I think there's so much to like about his game. And I don't think we've seen the ceiling just yet. And that, I think, is what is so intriguing about Legette as a prospect, because he has the size. He's got everything in the toolbox that I think you want in a wide receiver, and maybe not going to be the day one refined asset, but
Yes. Well, I'm going to add one more thing in before we go. If you need to read Dane Brugler's draft guide, it's absolutely fantastic. But there's a couple lines in here that I wanted to mention about Xavier Legette. Um, Established a reputation for his reliability and toughness in the Gamecocks program. One NFL scout said the coaches say he became their best practice player, and he never missed a practice. I'm not saying that you should draft players based on how good they are in practice or what their attendance is like. But I think the fact that he was so highly respected and you have the athleticism and the size to build off of that makes me feel pretty confident, again, in a late breakout, that he's probably going to turn himself into at least a functional NFL starter.
yeah. And I mean, you put that, like, let's juxtapose this with Jermaine Burton, who we opened up the show with,
Yeah.
who has a lot to like in terms of, a more refined receiver than you're going to find with Xavier Legette, smaller. But I mean, I want the guy that wants to be there. I want the guy that shows up every day. And I think, the fact that this is a player that has all those traits, and then the size and athleticism component as well, that's a guy that I'll bet on despite the late breakout. Like, everything deserves context, but I don't think there's any player that we've evaluated so far whose context is more important
Correct.
than Xavier Legette's.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Modjuk. Check out her work at Pro Football Focus in Behind the Steel Curtain. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow as we discuss Texas running back Jonathan Brooks.